I don't understand why it's so difficult to confirm an appointment.
No, I'm so sorry, Miranda. I actually did confirm last
Details
night.
of your incompetence do not interest me.
A top executive at Amazon quits, saying the company culture is just too toxic.
The reality is this, that we all want dignity and respect, but we don't all treat each other with dignity and respect, so this becomes the challenge.
You're going to be able to find people who are current employees of the company that you're interested in and reach out to them. If it's positive or negative information, believe me, they're going to be willing to share.
Those choices affect the way that we think about an organization because, see, we don't know where it starts or where it ends. Or is it the culture of that department? Is it the culture of that organization?
And since we spend 1/3 of our lives at work, what if we did that with people who didn't look like us? I think the world would be a totally different place outside of work. That can happen if business gets single-minded about racism.
New alarm bells ringing tonight on the coronavirus outbreak in this country.
For a business that can allow more employees to telecommute, we want you to do that.
You need to replace those water cooler conversations with greater rigor around management and engagement. You have to force yourself to make sure that you're connecting with your team every day.
As leaders of organizations, you want all of your employees to be emotionally attached to the organization, to be fully engaged, and they will be when they feel that they are treated with dignity and respect.
All right, while people start to continue to trickle in, we are going to get started with today's Fireside Chat, which is the connection between dignity, respect, and talent management. Just going to go through a few housekeeping items. I am Brittany. I am a partner with Heidi on her team, so I'll be running through the tech on the back end of today's Fireside Chat. Just so you know, all guest cameras will be turned off through the duration of the chat. You will be muted, but please feel free to chat us any of your questions throughout the discussion to be addressed time permitting at the end. Now to move on to introduce our host. Our host for today's Fireside Chat is Heidi Dulebohn. Heidi was the first female grain trader at ConAgra and the first woman to manage a major grain exporting facility in the US. But she made a career shift. She trained at the International Etiquette and Protocol Academy of London, England, among other places, and now is coaching emerging and established professionals on etiquette, emotional intelligence, cultural competence, and other key soft skills that can elevate their personal and professional lives. We want to thank you for joining us today, and I'm going to turn it over to Heidi.
Thank you, Brittany, and welcome everyone. I'm so thrilled that I'm kicking off our Fireside Chat series with this esteemed panel of experts today. We're going to talk about dignity, respect, and talent management. And given the increasingly polarized environment, any conversation around dignity and respect in the workplace is going to be filtered through a diversity and inclusion lens. Talent management is a critical part in navigating all of this. The workplace has changed so much in the last few years due to technology, and so much even more so in the last few months, thanks to COVID-19. Dignity and respect, even when working remotely, as many of us are, cannot be lost in translation. So please allow me, I am so excited to introduce our three guests who have so generously and graciously joined us today. I think we are in for an exceptional treat here today. So our first guest is Sonya Jackson. Sonya is a self-described executive producer of ideas that matter. She is a leader in reputation management, giving, and social impact with more than 25 years of experience as a corporate executive. Her career pivot led her to found Mantra for Good, an organization that unites people to collaborate on projects to improve humanity, build community, and impact lives. Sonya is also the producer of Punch 9 for Harold Washington, the first feature-length film about Chicago's first African-American mayor. Welcome, Sonya.
Thank you, Heidi. It's a pleasure.
Oh, so thrilled you're here. Adri Maisonet Morales is the Vice President of Enterprise Learning and Development and the award-winning Blue University at Blue Cross Blue Shield of North Carolina. In her current role, Adri is responsible for the organization's learning strategy, leads the training shared services, and champions the company's learning culture. As an accomplished workforce development professional and thought leader, she is notably recognized as the 2016 Chief Learning Officer of the Year from CLO magazine. Welcome, Adri.
Thank you.
And our third guest today is Michael Case. Michael is currently an executive search consultant focused on retained search for people and talent leaders in Series A to E venture-backed startups. He is also an executive coach empowering leaders from or based in East Asia to navigate the complex realities of Silicon Valley culture. Michael was formerly VP of Recruiting and an executive team member at Instacart, recruiting director at Uber and Salesforce, and he ran executive search for Apple Japan. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you so much, Heidi, for bringing us all together today.
Oh, what a panel. It's just, I'm just thrilled. Honestly, I could barely sleep last night. I can't wait to be with you and learn what you're going to say for all of our answers. So why don't we just dig in and kick off? So our first question is, what is the problem with workforce diversity initiatives given how polarized we are today? Sonya, would you please start us off?
Sure, we went in hot to start, Heidi.
Yeah, go in hot.
That's right. A couple of things that come to mind. When I started in the corporate world 30 years ago, there was a buzzword at the time that was multicultural diversity. Multicultural diversity seems to have morphed into diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI. And I think that some of the challenges include companies aren't sure where they want to enter. Companies aren't necessarily convinced that they are ready to take on DEI, even though it's easy to walk the talk is to talk the talk. And so I think that's a challenge. I think that there's some definitions that still need to be redefined as it relates to DEI, because there's not necessarily always consistent definitions. And so that certainly is an opportunity as well. And I think in this time, in this inflection point, things seem polarized, but I think that the fact that we're here talking about empathy and how we interact with other people, I think that that's some of the opportunity that is before us.
Oh, that's a great answer. And empathy is just so important in, I think, every aspect of our lives. Thank you so much. Adri, what are your thoughts on this question?
Yeah, I think that Sonya said it well. I think about this from a learning perspective, which is the other side of the equation, I would say. And so when I think about what's really wrong with DEI, in my opinion, it's gotten too academic. So there is this playbook that people just keep recycling, even though it no longer fits with our current times. And that in and of itself is problematic. And so in order for DEI to really bring value to the organization, you really do need to look at your workforce, and you need to figure out, what is the complement of your workforce? Where do you need DEI to really rest? And what are those outcomes? Without doing that, DEI really becomes more of an exercise, an administrative exercise that really does lack the vulnerability and empathy that you really need for it to stick to the wall and deliver on those outcomes. I think the other side of that is that DEI continues to fail to really address the net impact to the bottom line. So there is a real business case for having diversity initiatives in your organization. And when you look at the role that talent plays with the overall success of any organization, it's in that company's strategic best interest to figure out how to do it and how to do it well. So until they can get to the point of where they really are taking a step back and approaching it from a place of really wanting to have an inclusive workforce, it's going to continue, I think, to feel like an administrative exercise that just kind of continues to go around the same circle.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I agree. We have to have some sort of outcomes and some sort of measurement, and then you can make this business case. So that's fascinating. Michael, what are your thoughts?
I was actually wondering what, from based on what both Sonya and Adri said, it's easy for me, a white male identified person of a certain age, to feel we've made a lot of progress on this. And I sit in Silicon Valley where everyone talks a good game around this, although the data would show otherwise. I'm sort of wondering if we are making progress or not. I don't know. Lately, I'm not as sure as I once was.
That's very, very interesting. Anyone have any thoughts on that?
Sure, Michael, I'll jump in there because I, having being a little long in the tooth, I guess, and having, spent my career in multiple sectors with, different companies over 30 years, I often think the more things change, the more things stay the same. And so I think that if the progress was as robust as we would like it to be, I think that we would see it in the metrics. I think that we would see, the makeup of the C-suite changing. I think we'd see the makeup of the most senior ranks changing. And so then the question becomes, what are we talking about to get at that more? And I think that, diversity training and initiatives, I think that's the first place where we're wrong, because it's thought of as an initiative or as a program or as an activity rather than something that is integral to the infrastructure of companies. So that would be one place that I think that we should look. The other place is, I think everybody has to examine themselves, because whether we want to admit it or not, we all have implicit bias, and some have more than others. And that bias plays a role into how people hire, how people show up at work. I remember, working for a company, and there was a woman who would say, "I want it done now, lickety split, lickety split." And for a Southern Caucasian woman to say that to, a baby boomer who is a African-American woman, very challenging. And so I think we all have to look at how we show up as well.
That's very interesting. Thank you for that. Well, let's move on to our question number 2. We will, I think we could spend all day talking about all of these. It's just, we have such a wealth of knowledge with our panelists, but we will move on to our second question. Is dignity and respect are important in creating a positive workplace environment, but why are conversations and communications around dignity and respect so difficult? Adri, would you please kick it off?
Yeah, so that is a great question. And when I think about that, I immediately go straight to culture. So if you have a culture that does not value people first, then your culture probably is rooted in hierarchy, superiority, and competition. All of those attributes as an overuse creates a threat state. And so when you're in a threat state, it's very difficult for you to hear intent. And even for your intent, I think, to land the way that it needs to land, to have those types of meaningful conversations that suspends judgment, that really do get to a place of where there's mutually beneficial discussion and outcomes. And so, when people think about respect and they think about dignity, I think oftentimes they are treated synonymously, but they're different. And they're not mutually exclusive, right? So you've got to really be able to pull those things together. And it starts honestly with really being able to sit down in a safe way and have open and honest conversation to understand this, each other's perspectives, each other's truths, and really be able to respect that. And it's easier said, I think, than done. So I think once we can get to a place of where we can just kind of suspend judgment, and you'll hear me use that term a lot through this conversation, suspend judgment and listen, intently listen, and come at it from a real place of earnestly wanting to understand to get to a win-win outcome, it will continue to be a very difficult thing for people to talk through.
Oh, I agree. People have to feel safe that they can and won't be judged to voice their opinions. I totally agree. Michael, your thoughts, please?
But absolutely on the culture bit, and a really important thing to remember there is it starts at the very top, right? The CEO is setting the culture, especially for a growing company that's been built up recently. I work with a lot of startups that overnight are billion-dollar companies, and if the CEO doesn't have that openness, that ability to suspend judgment, as Adri says, if they already have the answer for everything, it's going to be pretty hard for them to listen and truly understand those around them. And I work with a lot of CEOs. I think right now there's definitely a trend. Everyone is talking about this problem of DEI or D&I, but it's like a problem to be solved, and then they don't have to deal with it anymore. That's the approach that I get. Like, we've got to solve this. We've got to hire an HR person to solve this, or a head of diversity to solve this, instead of really these leaders taking it upon themselves to drive and make that change, and to understand and have very difficult, sensitive conversations. So if there's any diversity training needed, as Sonya was saying, it's probably not the teams, it's probably those senior executives. And the money isn't, the proof is in the pudding, right? If you look at the people they hire and the teams they hire, you get a good sense. My current company that I work for, Rocket Power, although the CEO, Matt, looks a lot like me, he has gone out of his way to build diversity in our teams, both geographically and internationally, and in every kind of way. And we feel that, and obviously we still need to do a better job at the executive ranks, but I think that you can tell pretty fast, by just listening behind what the answer is from these CEOs.
Yeah, it's so interesting. It has to start at the top, and it should be like creating this culture, not a fix kind of a thing. That's right, so right. Yeah. Sonya, your thoughts, please.
Yeah, I think I think we have to take another step back, because I was reading a study, and I'm sorry, I wanted to cite it, and I'm having a moment to remember the study, but it said that 32% of people distrust people with whom they live near or work. And so that's pretty huge when you think about that, because when you don't have trust is one of the pillars of empathy. When you don't have trust, it's also difficult to, I've worked in cultures before where you were only as good as your last mistake. And so I think as much as people in their heart of hearts want to, come to the table with dignity, with respect, with open communications, I think that the challenge is finding the comfort to be radically, to have radical candor, having the comfort to be forthcoming. A lot of times in conversations, things get a little hairy because they're tough, and most people are risk averse, and most people are conflict averse. I actually remember having a conversation with a CEO at a company who said, when issues happened with certain women and people of color, and because of our trust relationship, this person said this to me, the feedback isn't provided. They just go on to the next person. And so that's not a conversation. That's not dignity, that's not respect, and that's not radical candor. I think that there's a step back, and I will keep coming back to, I think some of that, it revolves around who people are and how people show up.
Exactly. And that's the beauty of a diverse workforce. You have diverse thoughts, diverse thinking, and that's the beauty of it. Well, thank you all. That's very interesting. So we alluded to making a business case for diversity, inclusion, and dignity and respect. So how do you put a price tag on the right culture? Michael?
What is the saying? culture eats strategy for breakfast, I think. I'm forgetting who said that. It might have been Andy Grove, but I can't remember. I think it really starts. The culture you build will create the company that you have. So it really depends what you're looking for. If you're looking for a very fast exit with a lot of money, as much money, if you want to make as much money and get out as fast as possible, you're gonna have a certain culture. You're gonna have probably not gonna have a lot of trust, and you're probably gonna have a lot of backbiting, but maybe people will get rich. If that's what you're trying to do, it's very hard to fix that or to change that, right? So I think being honest with yourself or keeping these companies honest and what are they really trying to do. There are other companies that I think really go out of their way. That Salesforce is an example that comes up of like just spending where it matters and actually putting money behind initiatives and really making decisions that go against the short-term business interest, but could be good for the long term. And then I think that a related question, which has been talked about lately, is what is the point of a company, right? Is it just to make money for its shareholders in the old Milton Friedman model, or can we expand that to stakeholders? And if we're expanding it to stakeholders, that probably changes how you think about this investment, right? After 5 years in Silicon Valley, I'm a little bit jaded about the real motives here of everyone just trying to make the world a better place, but I'm still optimistic that we can get there.
Oh, great. Yeah, it seems like that whole thinking is evolving right now. The whole corporate bottom line thinking. Sonya, what are your thoughts?
I think Michael's comments are well stated, and it's interesting because companies are ultimately in business to be successful and to be profitable, and I think sometimes it's at a disservice to culture. I think everyone has probably worked in an organization that either had rapid growth or because of a leadership change or whatever variable may have happened, the culture changed and how certain things were being pursued changed. And so I think that companies have to realize that all of what we're talking about as it relates to culture, as it relates to change, it's something that has to be invested in. And I don't know that there's a price tag, but I know the number isn't zero.
Yeah, very good. Adri?
Yeah, what I would say is culture is absolutely measurable, both qualitatively and quantitatively. So when you think about it qualitatively, we're in an age of social media. Everything is very public now, right? And we definitely have, we've heard the term war on talent for years, but it's more true now than it's probably been at any time in our lifetime. And people do their homework on organizations now. So regardless of how much money the company may be worth, if the company has a terrible reputation, they're going to have a very hard time recruiting top talent. I'm sure Michael can give us all kinds of stories on that.
Oh, yeah.
On the flip side of that, if you have a culture that is toxic, and you can define whatever toxic means to you, you're probably going to have very high turnover. You're probably going to have low engagement. You're probably going to have a lot of expensive talent that's not working to their full potential. All of those things adversely impact your bottom line. So smart organizations understand that, and they invest in their culture, and they're very intentional about, number one, assessing what their culture is and drawing correlations back to the vision of what it should be, and then pulling the right levers along the way to course correct until they get to a set point where the culture is a fair representation of what that company should look and feel like.
Oh yeah, that's so interesting. And it's, Michael, would you like to jump in? Because, you can retain people. Happier people are going to be more productive. That's just naturally, I think some studies have proved that. And you'll retain them longer. And they might even go out and help recruit in other talent to come in with you. Have you seen a lot of that, Michael? Do you want to jump in on that?
Sure, absolutely. And I think the current generation is about a generation behind me in the workforce, and they, as on the whole, do really seem to care about this, and really want to know what their leaders stand for, and they're making their decision by that. So that's a pretty easy thing to put a price tag on. If you've got a CEO who's bumbling along saying some dumb things, that might indicate what they really think, right? And actually, I remember, I don't know if she's going to share, but Sonya had a little bit of a story about that I thought was pretty powerful.
Would you share, Sonya?
I don't remember which story, Michael.
Oh, maybe about choosing who to work for. Like, I think you said not all money's good money or something.
Oh,
like
that's
that.
right. That's right.
I don't want to put you in the spot, but I thought it was a fantastic story.
Yeah. I'll just say it very, since we're being recorded, I'll just say it very carefully. There was an opportunity that came up, and an executive had made some really bad decisions that were reflected quite broadly. And, I've often been a fixer throughout my career. I've often been the person to come in to mediate the issue, to come in and to calm things down. And so that was the opportunity that was, placed in front of me. And I actually said, we have to decide who we want to work for, and all money isn't good money. I spent a fair amount of my career because of PR putting lipstick on pigs, but I've always said you have to have a pretty shade. And that one that opportunity didn't offer a pretty shade of lipstick.
Oh,
I hope you don't have that phrase trademarked. I want to use that.
Use it. It's not mine.
That's terrific. It's terrific. But like you say, the culture you create is reflected in your brand, and it just emanates from there. So, okay, well, this next question is really sort of near and dear to me, because everything I do, my work, all is centered around etiquette, empathy, and empowerment. So our question is, what role does empathy, empowerment, and etiquette play in creating a culture that attracts top talent to organizations? Sonya, would you please kick us off?
It's funny because that question, the first thing that came to mind was the fact that Starbucks is providing financial incentives around DEI, around attracting talent in the corporate office and the manufacturing sector, so in higher levels of the organization. And so the reason that came to mind for me is because, the focus often is on metrics like that, and soft skills don't always get as much of an uptick. And so we're not necessarily rated on empathy or empowerment or etiquette. Like when you have a survey or when people are interviewing, there's not like a baseline of people looking for that. And it's fascinating because I will tell you hands down, I would rather work with an emotionally intelligent person than a smart person or than a book smart person, because emotional intelligence is the cornerstone of empathy. And so I wish that those soft skills were more strongly rated and more strongly thought out to attract talent. It's not just, what sort of, what do you bring to the table in terms of, your work skills, your experience, but I think that those are critical things that need to be looked at more closely as well.
Well, I obviously feel very strongly about that too. And the beauty is emotional intelligence, we can improve that. As opposed to our IQ, we're basically born with that. So that is something we can work on, soft skills. And, if people are smart enough for the job, that the soft skills are the things that can elevate them, that can set them apart. But Adri, what are your thoughts on this, please?
Yeah, I loved what Sonya said. She is absolutely spot on. And I will tell you, with all the disruptors that we're experiencing with advances in technology, process automation, et cetera, those soft skills are becoming more and more critical, quite frankly. And so when the question, what does empathy, the role that empathy, empowerment, and etiquette play in creating the culture that attracts the top talent, to me, it's the secret sauce. It's all about the behaviors. So empathy at its core really is helping people to see each other for who and what they are, the way that they want to be seen, right? So again, I'll go back to suspending judgment. So I'm not going to look at you from the lens of my unconscious or sometimes my very conscious bias. I am going to have an open mind, and I'm going to receive you and try to understand and connect with you in the way that you would like me to. That creates a different level of curiosity. The empowerment and the etiquette means that if I'm coming to work for your organization, I know that I am going to be empowered to bring my whole self to work. I am going to be able to be my authentic, full self and work to my full potential. And you as my leader and my coworkers are going to support that. And I can expect good behaviors through etiquette. That doesn't mean that you turn a blind eye if I'm not performing or if I do something wrong, but you would extend good behaviors that are rooted in empathy, that are rooted in dignity, that are rooted in respect, and correct those behaviors so that it can be a well-balanced, healthy workplace. So again, when I think about the talent today, this knowledge worker base that we're continuing to cultivate, that's the kind of organization that people want to come work for, a place where they feel like they can bring their whole self and do their best work.
Oh, so well put. I so agree. And if you have a culture that is empowered in these ways, then you can have these tough conversations respectfully.
That's right.
And move forward. So that's great. Michael, your thoughts, please.
Well, now I just want to work for Adri because that sounds great. That sounds like a really, really nice atmosphere, and I don't know that I've experienced enough of that. Heidi, when you said that EQ can be learned or improved upon, I felt like you were staring right at me, calling me out. It's something that I think for many years it was just trying to play the role that society gives you, and just pushing hard and fighting and driving and competing right in the world of business. And it's only more recently that I've come to understand that there's a lot of other things other tools we can use. And first we have to understand ourselves. In the coaching work I did at Berkeley, I think 80% of our cohort was women. And I realized that was the first time in my career I'd been through like an intense training or intense project for weeks on end with mostly people that were very, very different than me, despite spending a long time in Japan. And that was like the way communication happened was very, very different from most of the companies that I've been in. And it was beautiful. It was lovely. I felt very comfortable to open myself up and be more vulnerable. And it's something I want to do more of. So I absolutely agree that can be learned. I think I'm probably still a work in progress. But thanks for pointing that out.
Oh yeah, it's something we can learn throughout our lives. And the good news is it naturally gets better with maturity as you age. So, we have that going for us, or I do. So, so our next question is and this is very interesting, I think. There is a gap between employee engagement survey responses and leadership's perception about employees' engagement. Mm-hmm. How exactly can leaders approach talent management differently to create positive change in their organizations? Adri, would you please start this?
Yeah, I'll go back to a word that Sonya threw out early in the discussion, and that's trust. I think that leaders would do well to just kind of take a giant step back and slow down long enough to start having meaningful conversations with their employees. When the trust is there and you have that dialogue, people will tell you how they really feel, and then you can course correct. But oftentimes what's happening is leaders are operating at such a fever pace right now that they're driven to distraction. So instead of really putting the human back into talent management, in some instances, people are treated like an object. They are a means to an end. They are a means to get the work done, a means to hit a particular metric. And that, I think, is a very flawed way of managing their talent. You really do need to be able to have those conversations that do, I think, foster trust, that gets to a place where employees could be much more autonomous in their work. So I believe that most people do go to work, especially when they're in a good environment, and they want to do a good job. It's not until they find themselves in toxic environments, and when they have a toxic relationship with your leader, that you deal with low levels of engagement, you deal with presenteeism, you deal with all these things that are counterproductive. But by creating a place where you do have more trust, more autonomy, more flexibility, and where you truly are, I think, allowing the environment to cultivate more of a business partnership, that, you know, everybody is in this together and we're all fighting towards the same end as opposed to fighting against each other. I think that then can start shifting the conversation so that the perception of engagement is much more aligned. And leaders, I think, would have a much better opportunity to manage the talent more effectively than what we've seen in a lot of organizations, especially with what's going on today with people at the tipping point of COVID and all these other social stressors that people can't just leave on the shelf between 8 and 5 when they're working. Again, it goes back to my point around the whole person management.
That extremely well put. Thank you. Thank you. Michael, your thoughts, please.
One important thing to remember is that leaders are people too. And it's a hard job, right? So when I've worked with some pretty senior leaders, you can put them up on a pedestal and you can think they're kind of superhuman or they're just going to do everything perfectly. They're not, and it's a really hard job. That's, I think, just important to think about. But then the feedback that I would give to leaders is, I worked with someone once. She had this great saying that sometimes you have to slow down to go fast. So to build on what Adri said, you know, everyone's moving so fast. They're just driving. They're not stopping and taking the time to really think. And in the current COVID era, it's even exacerbated even more. And to think that people might be different than them, have different needs than them, a different situation than them. That's hard to do. So I think helping leaders to think about how people may be different from them, and that goes back to trust. But I think it was Adri mentioned the just having those honest conversations and being open to them. So it seems like it's some of the same things that we've been talking about will help in this as well. But there's an openness and an honesty that's needed from leaders to really make a difference.
I really agree. It goes back to empathy and emotional intelligence, and you can't have that without taking a pause. You have to stop for a minute, have a pause, be self-aware before you can even look at the other person, you know, and walk a mile in their shoes. So yeah, that's so well put. I really appreciate that. Sonya, your thoughts, please?
Sure. Well, first, I think that we can't make a difference between leaders and the rest of us or the rest of them, because first of all, everyone's a leader in their own right. But in addition to that, even if your role in an organization became a leader, for most of us, it was from the school of hard knocks. You had to walk, you had to work away. I don't believe in many structures. Some people get it. Some people get leadership long before they're ready. Some people get to be in a leadership role because it's an entitlement or whatever. And I think it's really important that leaders understand that that they had to come up through the ranks themselves. And in addition to that, just because you are in a role that you are identified as a leader, that doesn't necessarily make you a leader, for the people that you're working with. And I think that it's important, and I always go back to self, because I think that it's important to be self-aware. I think it's important to be introspective and reflective. And I think that no one should ever presume that they have it. I think more importantly, we should look to see what we can get. And having made mistakes, you know, as a leader at different times in my career, I'm speaking very specifically to that, because it only has to happen one time, and then you go take a step back and go, what could I do differently? By the way, that ties back to empathy, because when you're able to look at yourself realistically, when you're able to look at where you may be flawed or where you may have been flawed in judgment, that is, you know, the way to improve. And the other thing that I want to say is, you know, for Michael, you made a comment that about emotional intelligence, and I would not have ever thought of you as not being emotionally intelligent until you said that, just because of my interactions with you. I do, though, understand, I've never worked with you, and I do understand that people who, because of how companies are set up, you end up in a position to work fast, longer, smarter, harder, get it done. And that is counterintuitive to empathy, to emotional intelligence. And many companies operate under the presumption that you're only as good as your last mistake. And so that creates that sort of churn as well. But I think the key piece is the onus. Not only if you are the leader, then the onus is on you to create the trust, create a safe work environment, and to look at yourself, you know, to make sure that you don't have blind spots that are causing you not to lead well because of your perceptions.
Yeah. Heidi, can I just say one more thing too, please?
Please, this is good. Please.
Yeah, one thing, there's something that Michael said and something that Sonya said that triggered this thought in my head. So I do agree with you, Sonya, that, you know, everybody effectively is a leader, but there's such a huge responsibility when you are a people leader. And I think that, you know, that can't be minimized, not suggesting that you're minimizing that, but I say all that to say, in this time where a focus on talent management is so critical to organizations, it places that much more emphasis on the role of the people leader. And one thing, again, that both of you said that kind of triggered a thought for me was vulnerability is often regarded as a weakness. And so leaders shy away from it, but it is such a critical attribute that leaders not only need to embrace, but they need to demonstrate. And so you're right, Michael. Leaders are people too, and they're going through it too. And there is such power in that leader and that employee or that team member coming together around, you know, common challenges. And everybody is suffering right now in one way or the other as our world has been appended. And so being able to express that level of vulnerability, whether it's with this situation or whatever the situation is, it just really does, I think, level the playing field in a way that can make it possible for that trust to start getting developed in a way that starts to knit the relationship for that forward motion that does drive the right types of outcomes for the organization.
Yeah, it's totally counterintuitive that this sort of being soft or vulnerability is sort of associated with a softness. That can like be really, really effective for your organization.
Yes.
and your leadership, right? And that is not something they taught, at least when I was in school, right? So it's something I've observed and learned, and I think it's a wonderful thing. But I don't see it as much as I would like in the workforce.
No,
Michael, not only is it not taught, but we see less of interaction because they spend time on their devices. It used to have play, which caused you to interact with people, to become, to develop empathy, to develop all of those things. And, of course, now that we spend much of our time looking at our devices, or people spend time looking at television and all those things, it's made us less connected. And I think it's all a continuum of the change that is happening, and that is some ways problematic, in how we engage with each other, because, we're taught less and less people are taught less and less to engage because of technology. I sound like a Luddite, sorry, but I like the engagement.
My 11-year-old daughter's in the background. I wonder if she hears that about the technology and to not forget to interact with people.
Oh, well, you talking about leaders, when I think back to some of the leaders I worked for, the best ones were a little vulnerable, but like you say, the few would show that, but the best ones were, looking back, you'd like to think that. Well, we are, have our final question, and then we will, if you'd be so kind, we'll make this kind of quick, and then we'll leave a little time for Q&A, and we'll have a hard stop at 60 minutes. So our last question, please, is will workforce diversity initiatives survive in a post-COVID era? Michael.
Absolutely. 2020, I was thinking about this when washing dishes yesterday, like 100 years from now, like people will be looking back as 2020 as this big year. Like it's going to be remembered. And this is important. This is something that workers are demanding, to have better workplaces, right? And I would just say that what diversity is looks different in different places. I worked in Japan for a long time, and what that means, what diversity means there, is a little bit different than here. But I think any good leader recognizes that it's important, and I'm hopeful.
Oh, good. That's good. Good. Sonya?
I actually think the question is more of, will it survive not only post-COVID, but our new way of interacting, our new way of, I remember when COVID first started, I'm sorry, what were you going to say, Heidi?
It's very interesting. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay. I remember when we were first starting to hear about COVID, and they said, go shopping for 2 weeks and you're going to be good. And it's now 5 months later. Our world has changed so much. There are also some things that are outside of our control. And, companies will have to grapple with, in terms of DEI, I can't make a blanket statement that I believe it will survive. And I'm not saying that I don't believe that diversity efforts will survive. I actually wish they weren't diversity initiatives. I wish diversity, as I said earlier, would become part of the infrastructure. That companies would think of diversity as a foundational pillar of what, of who they are, of their ethos. And so I think that if it has to do with legislation, if it has to do with, companies not being accountable, then I would be dubious. But if it has to do with, as Michael was saying, the will of the people, then I think that, people will push for it. I'm the skeptic, I guess.
Well, that's good. That's the beauty of it. That's the beauty. We all have our own opinions. Well, thank you very much. I think this has been a terrific discussion. I wish it could go on longer. There's so much more I'd love to learn from you all. And I know that it's time for some Q&A. So is Brittany?
I will jump right back in. Thank you all again. And sorry we had to quickly wrap that up, but we do want to make sure we can get to a few of these questions that we've had throughout the chat. So the first question, Michael, goes to you. Do the initial training sessions need to be directed to the CEO and then immediate managers underneath the CEO before you're doing any training for the other employees? For example, is employee training wasted if the head officers haven't been immersed deeply in a good training program?
I think so. I think it sounds like whoever wrote the question is dealing with this or has dealt with it and has maybe looking to make some change in their organization. Absolutely. Back to the culture, the idea of culture. If the CEO and the top level execs don't believe in it, it's not going to get done, right? So just papering it over and like rolling out, just back to what Sonya keeps iterating on is if it's just an initiative, that is it really changing anything, right? So I absolutely think it's got to be CEOs getting out and spending time with people that are very different from them, and they're probably not going to get that right in their office with their usual teams. And so absolutely, it's got to start at the top. I'd welcome any differing opinions, of course.
I appreciate that response, Michael. Thank you for sharing. And the next question that we have is for Adri. So you spoke of coming from a place of intention to understand. I agree, but I get a lot of platitudes when I have DEI discussions. How do you say to someone, I don't think you're being entirely honest right now, and it's prohibitive to positive action?
So at Blue Cross North Carolina, we had the same problem, and I think there are probably lots of people that can relate to the question or the statement. One of the things that we did is we had what we call inclusion circles. Inclusion circles were designed to bring like-minded people together to just have open dialogue. Within those dialogues, there was no judgment, there was no right, there was no wrong, it was just perspective taking. That was the beginning for us to really be able to have what we call meaningful conversations, to really sit down and give each other permission to just share our respective truth. And with that is what I like to say is courage, right? It takes courage to be able to look at someone that may think differently than you do, that may be approaching a situation differently than you, and have a crucial conversation with them to be able to say respectfully, but your behavior is blah, 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 and tie it back to the behavior and not the person. A lot of times those conversations go to the left because the person communicating whatever the problem is attacks the individual and not the behavior. Address the behavior and do it in a way that is respectful and that does mitigate that threat state, which hopefully then will lead to a better discussion and better outcome.
Thank you, Adri. That was great. We've got another question that just came in. Sonya, I'm going to throw this one over to you. So as an influencer or leader, what is your biggest source of hope for humanity? So a pretty broad question, but it incorporates a lot of what we talked about today.
Absolutely. Well, I am a person, anyone who knows me knows that hope springs eternal. And so my heart is always open and I'm always very hopeful. The glass is always half full. I always say, even if, the glass is always full. Rather, even if people say, oh, it's half full to the waterline, I always say there's air above the waterline. And so the glass is full. And so what I would say is, I feel very strongly that with everything that I'm seeing in this current inflection point at this current time, I do think that there are a lot of us who are much more sort of aligned than we may have thought. I think that I always believe that good wins. I think good people have a tendency to come together. I started Mantra for Good because I believe good people can change the world. And I think that that is what I love that Michael's taking our picture. I think that we have to, continue to believe in good, and so that's what my hope for humanity is that there are enough good people out there to come together and to work hard to create change. I think that there are people who are going to be there fighting us, but I think we can make it happen.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sonya. And finally, Heidi, this one was another question, and it's very aligned to kind of the things that you are currently doing in your role. So the question was around, do most training or coaching programs that you're familiar with include enough visual and audio examples of less desirable emotional intelligence and behavior, so that if one is deficient, they can see what they are saying or doing is not the best for productivity? So this question is more around, how do you coach somebody through that? And is there audio or visual cues that can help that?
Yes, we do a lot of work around this. And I think that having a few audio or visual examples are really powerful, because it always looks different than it feels. And you think you're doing something, you think you're being I'm self-aware, I'm in control of my emotions, I can understand, but most people don't. And you do not have to have a high IQ to have a high EQ. So that is something, as we said earlier, we can work on. So yeah, we do have some training tools that we can use, and it just sort of starts with a lot of different questions and a lot of examples and listening. It takes a little time to examine someone's situation and how they're handling problems and issues, and maybe dissecting their solutions. And then these answers are sort of exposed in the dissection. and you can start to learn. But back to sort of Michael's point earlier was it's about taking a pause and stopping. You know, it's hard for all of us. It's incredibly hard for me to stop for a minute and reflect on this. And when you take this time and work with a coach, yes, this will come, you will be exposed to things that you can work on, such as emotional intelligence.
That's wonderful. And I want to make sure that we have a moment, Heidi, for you to kind of wrap up what your feelings were about today and give us a nice tie-in and conclusion to this chat and the discussion we had.
Oh, well, thank you. And thank you to our panelists, Sonya, Adri, Michael. You know, you have such a wealth of knowledge and experience, and that you are willing to join us today and share with us and our listeners. Thank you so much for that. I know I learned a lot, and I agree so much with so many things that were said today. And it's going to take all of us, as Sonya said earlier, you know, it's going to take a village, but we can do it. We just have to get in there together and have these get comfortable having these uncomfortable conversations, doing it with respect, and we will keep moving ahead, and we will get to the point where hopefully we don't have to have these initiatives and we have these wonderful cultures. So dignity and respect, it's critical when we start crafting these wonderful talent management strategies and creating these cultures where you can bring your whole self to work and you feel safe and you feel included and you're respected and you can share opinions that may be completely opposite from someone else's, but this culture allows for this kind of discussion, and it's through this diverse thinking and a diverse workforce that innovation and creativity are going to soar. And if we can focus on the etiquette and empathetic leadership, the production is just going to go up. It's just simply, we will be more productive. We're going to be a whole lot happier while we're doing it, and it will fall down to the bottom line, and we can make a business case for this. So thank you all. Heartfelt thanks to each of you for joining us. Thank you to everyone that took time to tune in to our very first Fireside Chat today. I hope that you found some valuable information. Please don't hesitate to reach out with any questions. I am always available to you because I would love to continue this very important discussion. So thank you all. Thank you very much. And thank you all for tuning in.
Thank you, Heidi, for bringing us all together.
Thank you.
Thanks, Heidi.
Thanks,
Michael. And
Heidi. Thank you, Britt.
Looking forward to dinner with all of you when that's a thing.
My treat. Absolutely. Thank you.